Oh man, this is hard.
Okay. So, what are you doing today on 4th of July in Davis Square, Somerville, Massachusetts, washing the American flag in an old-fashioned wash tub? What are you trying to convey here?
I'm disturbed by all of the celebrations of patriotism on July 4th, as if our country were a great beacon of democracy and human rights. And I'm going to try to wash some of the lies out of this flag. I don't know, it's going to take a lot of soap here, but I'm seeing what I can do.
It'll take industrial strength soap to get all the bloodstains out of the U.S. flag, all the war just waged.
I know. Well, I just hate all these lies. You know, they tell us they're keeping us safe, and there's terrorism, so we have to wage war all over the world. Well, we create more people hating us the more war we wage. And actually, even what happened on 9/11 is a big question. I'm not convinced that, I am definitely convinced that what the government tells us is not what happened on 9/11, in which case all of this war on terror is a big lie.
Well, today is Independence Day. Isn't it true that the Independence Day holiday, July 4th, that most Americans celebrate every year? It's a nationalist holiday. I know they fly jet fighters over the annual Boston Pops 4th of July concert as a show of military might, and it costs the U.S. Air Force for that 30-second fly over the Boston Pops concert $100,000 in jet fuel. I think about how many hungry people in Boston could that feed.
Exactly.
So,
all of our priorities are totally turned around in this country. With all of the wealth we have and the power, we could feed everyone in the world, starting with our own people. There wouldn't be any homelessness. We could make all of the water in the whole world clean, provide clean water and enough to eat and education for every person. Instead, we always take the military option.
So tell me something. This is a very novel street theater idea you had. Where'd you get this idea from?
I really can't remember. It's been a long time, maybe 15 years ago.
Really?
So I just thought, this is so dirty, so full of lies and full of crimes, and we got to do something.
Is it looking any cleaner now? It's been in the suds for a while?
Well, maybe a little bit.
Okay, so any little bit helps. One life at a time.
Every little bit helps. Well, they talk about what a wonderful democracy we have and how there's the rule of law and all that stuff. Well, ask the guys at Guantanamo.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people there have been there for 14 years. They were picked up after the U.S. invaded Afghanistan with no real reason, claiming that the Taliban was harboring terrorists, which, even if it was, it doesn't make the people of Afghanistan responsible for what happened in 9/11, even if what the government told us was true, which is not. So they invade Afghanistan for no reason that they tell us about. I think they wanted a pipeline route. And
isn't it true that about U.S. history that in the 240 or some odd years of U.S. history since 1776, that our country, the U.S., has been at war of something like 225 of those years?
Yeah.
Some war or another?
They're always at war. When we finally got the Vietnam War to stop, we were so happy. We said, oh, wonderful, finally the Vietnam War is over, we can have peace. No, the next war comes along. And then the Cold War ended. That was the biggest one. We thought, oh, we're always having to have this Cold War because Russia's so terrible, the Soviet Union. And it turned out, when the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union collapsed, instead of having peace and a peace dividend, the U.S. got all the more aggressive and started, the military budget went up, even though we didn't have any big threat. They said, oh, well, our new threat is terrorism, so don't let down your guard.
So let's go off of communism to terrorism to what's next on the agenda. I don't know what the next ism will be.
The nice thing about terrorism is we get to say when it's over. I mean, there's always going to be somebody mad at us, especially the way we work.
Well, isn't it true that a country calls terrorists the other side? When the U.S. commits acts of terror by dropping drone bombs and invading innocent countries that had no attack upon the U.S., they're just as equal, even more so, terrorists than I'd say equal to the suicide bombers and all the other terrorism by ISIL, ISIS, and Al Qaeda. So revenge breeds revenge. Our leaders don't know that. They probably know it somewhere from Sunday school maybe years ago, but they sure have forgotten it.
One person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter.
Yeah, I imagine that King George III during the American Revolution called the colonial farmers fighting against the British troops terrorists or treasonous or something.
I'm sure they did.
It's interesting to note. I hope you'll mind my video commentary while you're watching the flag. Is that the American Revolution really wasn't a real revolution. Now, what happened basically, in a nutshell, with the War of 1776, there was a transfer of power from a group of white aristocrats in the Parliament in London to a group of white aristocrats in the colonies.
Hardly revolutionary.
And because you could see that they passed the Declaration of Independence, the only people who could vote in the first years of the United States' founding were white property males. Women couldn't vote. Native Americans couldn't vote. The original Americans, black people, slaves couldn't vote. Poor white people couldn't vote.
Yeah.
And it's really amazing that people think it's independence, but this all was.
The great Constitution, and it's gotten a little better as we've gone along, but it's no great document of equality by any means.
In fact, speaking of slavery, the British had outlawed slavery long before the American Revolution. I believe, if my history is correct.
It was founded on slavery.
Yeah.
And genocide, for that matter.
Well, all these Trump supporters, and I have to say Clinton supporters too, are against the immigrants.
Yeah.
We're all descendants of immigrants.
Yep.
And the only people
we're here, keep the rest of them out.
The only people who have the right to be here and truly speaking and honest with yourself is the Native Americans who've been there 40,000 years.
That's right.
And the black people who've been here as slaves who were brought here against their will. You know?
Let's talk about the people in Guantanamo.
Okay, sure.
So our country invades Afghanistan for no good reason. And they started rounding up people. They were paying bounties, actually. They said, give us some terrorists, we'll give you $5,000. So all these people, some of who were humanitarian workers, for crying out loud, or just normal people, they get hauled off to Guantanamo. 14 years later, they're still there. And people say they're the worst of the worst. Well, what would we think if a lot of Americans were being held in a prison in Afghanistan for 14 years with no charges, no trials, and being tortured?
Yes.
A lot of people would be very upset about that, but somehow when it's Muslims, when it's people far away, and somebody has told you they're the worst of the worst, a lot of people accept it. Well, I don't accept it. I want Guantanamo to close right now. I want the people who they have something against to be tried, although I don't really trust their justice system to get them a fair trial, but I definitely want the people who've been cleared for release to be let go.
Yes, what's your take on this annual 4th of July pro-war militaristic display every year we have in this country, especially in Boston, with the all the parades and the waving the flag, and what's your take on that as a peace activist?
I like the fact that people are together outside doing something that's fun, but that's about as far as I go.
Okay.
And I like the fact that the 9/11 truth people are out there trying to tell people that what our government says happened on 9/11. It's not really what happened.
So some of the right-wingers who celebrate this day with the flag waving would call us not unpatriotic. What's your response to that? What's true patriotism to you?
Well, patriotism, I don't even really care about patriotism. It's been so misused. You know, I think the way we can show that we love our country is trying to have it be doing the right thing. And blind love of country is no virtue for me.
Oh yes. I recall a quote from Dr. Samuel Johnson, who was a
Yeah.
British philosopher, a contemporary of the American Revolution. He made this quote in Britain in 1775. He said, "Patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel."
Yeah, I think that's.
And I think it's a
Yeah.
pretty heavy quote and very accurate.
Yeah.
My friend's doing here with washing the flag.
I think it's a very important symbolic gesture. I just recently graduated. I'm a Latin American scholar, and what I learned during my in-depth studies of our foreign policy throughout particularly central and the southern cone of South America throughout the past 20th century. I mean, most of the instability that we see in those countries that is causing so much immigration has been a direct result of our foreign policy in the interests of protecting corporate interests over the true democracies of the people. We say that we're promoting democracy, and then we oust democratically elected leaders because they are making moves to block exploitation by US-owned corporations. So I think that not only, I mean, obviously I know a lot more about the Latin American aspect of this, but for all of the war crimes that we've committed around the world, it is important that today, Independence Day, is not only a reflection upon our past, but also a very critical, tough love reflection on our future. This flag is not always an honorable banner to be waved. It is also an instrument of oppression, and we need to recognize the complexity of our narrative. Blind nationalism, that's not what Independence Day means for me.
Are you a student?
I just graduated from Northeastern University this past May.
And what did you study?
International affairs
good.
and Spanish language, literatures, and culture.
So what do you suppose in your young life, what radicalized you to the left? What do you suppose were the influences that made you think about these issues?
I think for me, the big turning point was when I was 15 years old. I came out as a lesbian, and being part of a marginalized community
Yes.
for the first time in my life and experiencing that loss of privilege really woke me up to look at the oppression of all different types of minorities, not only here in the United States, but across the globe. And it was that experience of not only being able to sympathize, but empathize with oppression that really launched me on a pathway towards caring about social justice.
Yes.